going to go through them one by one and answer all your questions here. Just as traditional login credentials were somewhat reliable before MFA became vital, do you think at some point MFA as we know it will not be enough to secure an application user? If yes, can you think of what the next layer of user authentication mechanism might look like? I think the big problem that we're going to constantly have with MFA, 2FA, two-step, whatever we want to call it, a password and another thing. And I say it that way because sometimes people get upset. They're like, oh, soft token is not really 2FA because it's something that it's already on your device. And if you have the device, then you have both the things, like possibly the password and a password manager and this. Let's call it two-step. The big problem I lament with that is the usability factor. And if you're all out there using MFA, 2FA, two-step and going, well, you know, what usability factor? It's not that bad. Try setting it up for your parents. I don't think it's just me, but when I try and set this up for mum and dad, it's painful. And it's not just that. It's like even for me, I get a new phone and I'm paranoid for like 3 months after that. I don't want to get rid of the old phone. I don't want to factory reset it because I'm like, gee, did I get all my soft tokens across? Because it's not just Google Authenticator. Maybe it's in Authy. What about the Microsoft Authenticator? Did that come across? Don't some apps like Twitter or even my government tax file login system, that needs to have a mobile app. Do I need to re-register that? Can I not get in and do my taxes if I don't have it? So this stuff is wonderful, but it is just fundamentally flawed from a usability perspective. Now, so the question here, do you think at some point MFA, as we know, would not be enough to secure an application user? It's a very binary question. It's like, yes, it's enough. No, it's not enough. I think where we're at the moment is when you have it enabled, from a security posture perspective, the level to which it raises the bar is very good. Now, then people go, oh, what about SMS? There's a blog post for this. I've wrote a blog post about, if you Google my name and 2FA, sort of about the hierarchy of 2FAs or MFAs or whatever. And yeah, SMS and a password is still better than just a password, right? So it still plays a role. Now, if yes, can you think of what the next layer of authentication mechanism would look like? I really like some of the, and I hate to use the AI term, but some of the AI sort of stuff around identifying behavioral norms. Now, a bunch of companies have been calling this user behavioral analytics for a while. And it sort of says, here's a hypothetical. Joe comes into the office each day and Joe's in the sales department. He opens some spreadsheets and he does some work and then he logs off at the end of the day, goes home. One day, Joe logs in from Beijing and pulls down 5 terabytes worth of marketing data. So, well, maybe it's not Joe. So it's kind of sort of saying this is what is a normal pattern, and then here is a deviation from the normal pattern. And what I really like about the hope of this is that it's an implicit security control that the user doesn't have to engage in themselves, set up, go through every time they log on, anything like that. So I really love the idea of this just ticking away in the background. Is this normal? Is this normal? Is this normal? 15. All right. While developing Have I Been Pwned, did the thought ever cross your mind that this could be used as a counterproductive tool, i.e. used in a social engineering attack, obtaining information that could be used to leverage on a person who may be up to no good and forcing them to pay ransom to keep data safe, having accounts they shouldn't have, etc., gambling, dating, yada, yada. So there's this constant thing going around in my head about the ethics of running a data breach notification service. And incidentally, there's a blog post called The Ethics of Running a Data Breach Notification Service. And everything is always weighing up. So if you want to ask a really binary question, is it possible for it to be abused? Yes, it is possible for it to be abused. Now, what is the likelihood of that compared to using other, let's say other OSINT style tools, and then offsetting that, what is the benefit that it brings by being there in the first place? That's where I think the real discussion is. So in fact, in that blog post, I'm explaining why email addresses are publicly searchable. In fact, why did I say that? I should actually look that up, and I'll tell you exactly why. What is it? Troy Hunt, Ethics of Data Breach Service, or something like that. Now, I hear from people all the time, they go, you should, when someone does a search, just send an email to that address, and then they have to prove ownership, so they get the email, and then what they can do is they can go and actually see the results. Now, there are a whole bunch of reasons why this is problematic. I really should have put better headings on this. here's a few of them. So the things like, first of all, sending email in large volumes is actually expensive. I've had times before I've peaked at, I think, 10 million unique users in one day. Now, each one of those people does 1 point something search. I would struggle to send 10 million emails in a month without it really, really blowing out costs. So there's the cost side of it. There's the delay in the email actually being sent. There is a lead time between sending an email and actually receiving an email. And it's not always just seconds. Sometimes it can be minutes, which completely kills the flow. Also, this would completely kill the API. So no one would be able to use the API because they wouldn't be able to validate the control of the email address. That kills off a whole ecosystem of things like really good security tools. It kills off the whole ecosystem of really large brand web applications that you know of, or web services, that do things like look for the presence of customers and data breaches to establish whether a sudden uptick in failed requests is due to a new breach they've just appeared in. It also kills, what else does it kill? Yeah, it kills my wallet because of the cost of doing it. It kills the ability for support desks to be able to use it. So one of the use cases I've heard of a lot is people say, I was talking to support and I had an account takeover, and they actually said, look, did you know that you'd been in a data breach? Have you reused your passwords? Here's where you can go and see if you've been in breaches. So it makes sense for that. It kills a whole bunch of the law enforcement cases where they're actually trying to do things like figure out where people's identities have been spread around the place. So there are all these really, really good legitimate use cases. And if nothing else, what I'd like people to understand is that I think about this more than you. That probably sounds obvious, and it's not meant to sound conceited, but I've spent 7 years almost now thinking about this day in and day out. And it will change over the years. It has changed already. It wasn't until Ashley Madison that we had sensitive data breaches. So to the comment here about adult sites or dating sites, that was the point where I went, there is a threshold beyond which the benefit is outweighed by the risk. Therefore, flag it as sensitive, you've got to prove control of the email address. For it's something like 1 point something % of individual records in the system. 16. What advice would you give to companies like Edgescan to try encourage other orgs to improve the policies around credentials? Should all devs be looking to hook into the Have I Been Pwned API? Yes, of course everyone should be using the Have I Been Pwned API. I would really like as many organizations as possible to use the K-anonymity API around breached credentials. Now, I'll give you a good example. This is a really opportune time. And again, I haven't read these, so I didn't know this was coming up. But I got given a data breach today, which went live, which is a Brazilian recruitment site. Probably one that you haven't heard of unless you're Brazilian. I certainly hadn't heard of it. Had plain text passwords in there. Those plain text passwords, if I look at my stats here, I mean, okay, number one, they're absolutely atrocious, the passwords themselves. There were 1.3 million, let's round it up to 1.4 million unique passwords in there. Now, this was out of 11 million records as well, so do the maths on how bad people's passwords are. Now, I have dropped this into my working draft, if you like, of pwned passwords, and there's just a tad under 690,000 passwords I have never seen before that are now going to flow through when I do the next release into that API. So I would love for developers to be hooking into the Pwned Passwords API and making sure that when this next corpus of data goes live, anyone using those passwords at the very least gets some sort of a big warning when they register, log in, or change password, the 3 places which they would provide the password in plain text. So I'd love them to use that. All right, so now I've got to work towards the next version of Pwned Passwords now that I've put that out there. 17. And it looks like it's the last question too. 17. Can a better experience while using MFA, multi-factor authentication, be created, especially for non-tech savvy individuals? Yes, we can always do better. And I think the question is, having just flagged how concerned I am about the usability aspects of MFA, how do we reduce the friction? Now, I'll give you a really good example of this. The accounting software I use, every time I'll rephrase this. I think it's once a month I have to re-authenticate with my token. And it's a soft token, runs on my phone. Every time I have to do that, it's painful. I'm not very happy about that. Facebook, Other than signing into a new device, I can't remember the last time I had to MFA my way into Facebook or Twitter or things like that. I just pick my phone up and it works, or I go to the tab that's always got it open and it works. So there's a lot to be said for the ways in which we reduce the friction. And then going back to the point I made just before about things like user behavioral analytics, this is a great way to sort of reduce the risk by reducing things like the frequency with which we need to use MFA. So let's say the accounting software. I'd much rather the accounting software go, okay, not only has this person MFA'd their way into here to begin with, they're coming from a machine, which they regularly come from. We're kind of all at home these days, so very often our IP isn't even changing. And it's not to say if your IP changes, challenge you again, but you can have all of these little indicators around what constitutes normal behavior versus a potential risk. So I'm coming from the same browser, from the same IP address. I've already MFA'd my way into it. And then what am I doing when I'm in there as well? Am I behaving normally? Am I sort of reconciling some accounts and checking some balances? Or am I starting to transfer money or do things like that? So I really like the idea of security controls that are incremental to the risk and don't necessarily just hit you with the ban hammer straight away or give you an experience where it makes your life very, very hard and creates friction, which is what MFA does every time you have to try and use it. So I think that there are some good practical ways of dealing with it using techniques like that. Okay, so I have come to the end of the questions. I hope that they were useful for everyone. You've gotten a bit out of that. There is a blog post on pretty much everything, other than I think the one there that it's not that it threw me, but I had to carefully choose the words for was the diversity piece. And if anyone does want to talk about that one-on-one, ping me and I will literally give you examples of what I mean about why this is a very, very difficult thing at the moment. But with all that said, I hope everyone's taking care in your various parts of the world, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to answer your questions. See ya.